morning, everybody. We are live. Welcome to CertaPay's Coffee Break series. This is coffee break number 14 of the year. And today we're going to talk about vaccines and masks. We've got the Delta variant out there and how all of this impacts you as a business owner. And so we're very glad you joined us this morning. And I'm here with the CertaPay HR team. I am your host, Rachel Comella. And I've got Cindy Merkel with us. She is our moderator this morning. And there are several other people from CertaPay's fantastic HR team on the webinar this morning with us. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So as I said, I hope you all have a cup of coffee because we have a lot to talk about. I have a wonderful Ethiopian Sumatra, very excited about it. And like some of you, Kelly, this is my third cup of coffee, so I'm glad you guys are all in on the coffee train there. Cindy, what do you have?
My traditional dark roast, 2 shots of espresso. Same old, same old.
From Starbucks. All right. So what are we talking about today, guys? You know, COVID has been quite a situation. We've all had to shift gears and figure out how to maneuver through these waters. And just when we think we kind of have it down, we kind of have a grasp on what to do and what not to do, the landscape changes. So that's the other thing that we have gotten used to, is that it's going to change again. So kind of a common theme. I'm sure you're all aware of that by now. So what we're going to talk about today, some of the updates and things that we know. Do we have to pay our employees when they're out with COVID pay? We'll talk about that. Vaccines, mandates about vaccines, policies surrounding vaccines. We're going to cover all of those pieces and get to your questions. Masks, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, who needs to, who doesn't need to, what do we do, what policies? And then finally, safety and how to make sure everyone is safe in your business and for your clients. So that's kind of the bottom line discussion. And before we move on, I want to just throw out a semi-disclaimer and say, you know, we're not here today to have a political discussion. We're not having a scientific discussion. We are only talking about some recommendations for you as business owners. So it's more about a business discussion and what makes sense for you, and really reminding you that as a business owner, a lot of the choices are up to you. We want to give you some guidelines that will keep you in compliance and help keep you safe and keep your employees safe. And then you kind of decide how you want to use all of that information. Does that make sense to everybody?
And also, just to parlay off of what Rachel said, please keep in mind, we are giving you the latest updated information that we have. That doesn't mean it's not going to change on Friday, but as of right now today, we are giving you the best information that we have researched and have been put out by all the necessary agencies.
That's right. And we do mean we. So we have all been working together, sharing information and passing it to one another to make sure we are all on the same page. So same thing. And we are doing that for you. We want to make sure we keep all of you in compliance and up to date. So here we go. Let's start with the paid leave, the FFCRA, Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and then also ARPA. So changes that were made in March under the American Families, so the change to the Recovery Act. And so what are we talking about? Do I have to pay my employees COVID pay? Well, you can. At the end of March, the original FFCRA guidelines were extended, only at that time they were also made optional. So if you want to extend the FFCRA, you can. We're in a window of time where it is optional. The current guidelines end September 30th. So you can offer it as paid leave. It's optional. It ends on September 30th. We do expect it to most likely be extended to the end of the year. We will keep you posted on that. but the optional FFCRA has been extended through the end of September at this point. Now, the other thing about it is if you are going to choose to keep that intact or offer paid leave, you want to be fair about it. So you're either offering the whole plan or you're not offering it, and that's okay. And if you do continue to offer it, you want to be fair. So you can't pick and choose who you offer it to. You either turn it on or turn it off. And there is a lot of information out there. We've done an entire webinar about that. So if you want to check out our website, under the news tab, you can find all of our coffee break webinars. The recordings are in there. You can find the one on FFCRA. You can find the one that we did on the ARPA and the extensions, COBRA pay. All of those pieces are in there. So if you want some specific details about that, please go check that out or reach out to us and ask us the questions. So under that FFCRA, paid leave is covered. It's full pay for an individual up to that 511 a day number, and it's an 80-hour allotment. That 80 hours did reset April 1st. So if you paid somebody 80 hours, either the end of 2020 or the very beginning of 2021, it reset. That 80-hour number started April 1st, ends September 30th. And then the 2/3 pay is for an individual employee who is caring for somebody else, either a child who's at school or somebody who is sick and needs care. And that also includes coverage for somebody who's going to get a vaccine. So if an individual employee is going for a vaccine, that's full pay for themselves. If they're taking a family member to get covered to get that vaccine, then this FFCRA paid leave covers that at 2/3 pay. And also recovering from vaccine side effects. So that's all part of it, but again, it's optional. So if you want to take a look at that, offer it or don't, but be consistent. And if you do offer it to everybody. So again, you've got that 80 hours for sick pay, and then the total allotment for that 2/3 pay or caring for somebody else is 12 weeks. It was originally 10 weeks, but now it is 12. So that's your max, and that number did not reset. So it's a 12-week total from the beginning of FFCRA, not the April 1st window for sick pay. Did that make sense to everybody?
Can you clarify that? So if I'm home with my child, are you saying that I can have 12 weeks off?
That's right. The FFCRA paid leave for caring for a child, and this is a child whose school or daycare is closed or child care provider is not available, or even if a child is sick with COVID or sick with side effects from a vaccine. This is a 12-week max at 2/3 pay, capped at $200 a day. And that number did not reset. So this is a total from the beginning of COVID when FFCRA was first implemented. So this number is a running total that started last year. So if somebody used all of those 12 weeks already, they are not eligible for any additional FFCRA 2/3 pay. And then getting the reimbursement for this is pretty simple. It's you just subtract it from your payroll taxes due on your 941. And if you're a CertiPay payroll client, this is easy to do. We have codes for that in payroll. And so it's automatically taken care of when you code the hours properly. So if you have any questions about that, again, we can help you with that. Good?
Yes, ma'am. Keep going.
All right. So let's move into masks and vaccines. And again, a lot of stuff to cover here. So we want you to take a close look at CDC guidelines. That's what we're using. And the CDC originally said, well, vaccinated people don't need to wear masks anymore, except now we're seeing some different guidance. So the CDC says you may still need to wear a mask under certain situations. So don't just automatically discard the mask because of the vaccination status. So pay close attention to kind of the situation. It really does change frequently. So the whole picture matters. And that's what you want to look at when you're thinking about how you create policies surrounding these kinds of situations. And the other thing we want to say is the CDC is guidance. We don't answer to the CDC as an agency from a business standpoint. We have, the other agencies that we really need to pay attention to are the ones we answer to. So the DOL, the EEOC, OSHA, the NLRB, and then we have to follow, ADA and even ADEA guidelines for age issues. So we want to pay attention to the agencies that we answer to. The CDC gives us guidance, and that's what we're using to kind of create these policies for you guys as business owners and who we have to answer to. And we think that's a good way to go. Follow that guidance the best you can, and that will help kind of guide this path. And the other thing about it is changing. Things do change on a regular basis. Like Cindy said, these are the things we have to pay attention to today. So you want to be careful too, you've got to balance out the risk avoidance with your own workplace, the business decisions you make, and your own culture and morale within your organization. And at the end of the day, you're in this business because this is your livelihood. You want to make money, but at the same time, you want to keep people safe. And this is what OSHA says to us. Under the General Duties Clause, you must provide a safe working environment for your team. And so weighing out all these things is kind of the position we're in. And it's, you really have to be pretty nimble right now because you want to pay attention to the agencies and the guidance and the employees and really find that fine balance where everybody is in a safe place while still doing business and being successful. And a very important point to talk about is the discrimination piece. And that's a big part of the conversation, and it's always a part of the conversation. You want to be fair to everybody and be careful not to discriminate for any reason. And COVID is no different, and vaccines are no different, and masks are no different. So you have to be careful not to discriminate against anyone for any of these pieces that come into play. And I'm sure we're going to see some issues down the road when we really talk about these things. So protect yourself now by being mindful and informed and making sure that, it's easy if you just say, we want to be fair and kind and keep everybody safe. And if you can do those things, you're probably going to be okay.
I also would like to remind everybody that our last coffee break, Claire did an entire segment on OSHA and the OSHA requirements as it comes to reporting COVID cases at work. So if you have any questions from an OSHA perspective, obviously watch the video. And if you do have questions, you can field those to us, and I will gladly field those to my OSHA perfect person, Claire.
Absolutely. And I think we've got Claire on the line too. So if we get some, we get some special OSHA questions, we're going to send it right over to you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. So just to kind of dig in a little bit more on some of these pieces, I mentioned these agencies that we really have to answer to, and the EEOC is telling us you can mandate things. So you can mandate masks need to be worn. You can mandate that vaccines can be a condition of work. So, that's the first piece. That's the question we get. Are we allowed to mandate it? Well, yes, we are. We are allowed to. So how you use that information is the important piece. So if this is something that you choose to do, you really want to understand all the pieces that go with it. Again, talking about all the agencies involved is an important piece. So now you say, okay, can I make it a condition of employment? Well, yes, you can. We know that that's something you can do, but you have to do certain things. So you want to pay attention to a couple things. If you're going to do it, you have to create exceptions. So there has to be an avenue for somebody to say, I can't do it because of this medical situation or a disability or a religious belief. So you have to allow for these exceptions to exempt somebody from that policy. And then what does that look like for you? Do you need to have a reasonable accommodation? Do you need to create some other kind of additional PPE or spacing or remote options? You really want to look at the full picture of, if this is the route you want to go, how do you do that and protect your business? And how do you do that and stay in compliance and remain fair to all employees? So the most important piece of that is you have to create a path for exceptions. Pay attention to your state laws. This is another important thing. I think we still have 15 states with mask mandates. We had some states that dropped the mandate but added it back in. And we have some states who said you can't make masks mandated or mask wearing mandated. So it's all over the place. Pay attention to your specific state's rules and laws surrounding these different things, vaccines and masks. And then we have certain states where you're allowed to ask if somebody is vaccinated, but you can't ask for proof. So this is all over the place here. Please be aware of where you are and what your state's laws are on that. I think we could spend an entire month on coffee break just talking about the differences in state laws.
And if you are in a state where you're allowed to ask for proof, you have to remember another piece of that is that now becomes a piece of medical history. It has to be maintained for a certain amount of time, just like any other employee medical information. So there's a lot more pieces to the pie.
Right, and depending on what documentation you get, it has to be maintained for different lengths of time. So be mindful of that. I am going to touch on that in a second. But Cindy's right. Documentation is extremely important. And that's kind of, we can jump to the bottom right of the slide where I talk about confidentiality. And that's kind of the issue there is, now that you've got this medical information, what do you do with it? So that's where the issue is. In fact, I've really heard the word HIPAA or the acronym HIPAA used so much more this year than I ever have in the past. It always was just this thing we did all, as HR professionals or medical professionals, it's an issue. And you have to know that maintaining the documentation in a safe, confidential way is your responsibility. But now people are saying, but my HIPAA rights and my HIPAA, blah, blah, blah. And that's not really what HIPAA is. Asking somebody if they have a vaccine or not is not a HIPAA violation. And you don't really infringe on somebody's HIPAA rights. That's not quite what HIPAA is. So what it means is that we are obligated to keep the documentation that we receive confidential, and we can't share it with people without the person's consent. So HIPAA compliance really refers to the paperwork that we get that is connected to medical information. And it started back in the early 90s, and the primary purpose was for your medical records at your doctor's office. So as business owners, it's a much smaller layer, and it really has to do with, okay, so you found out something about my medical history. Now you have to store it and file it and protect it. And that's basically all HIPAA is. So like, people are getting crazy about HIPAA. They just don't really know what that means, but it's about protecting the paperwork. So like Cindy said, now that you have information about my health, you have to protect it and keep it confidential and safe where nobody else can see it. So let's go back to concerted activity. So the NLRB does protect concerted activity. So talking about, let's say I make vaccines a requirement or a condition of employment, it now becomes protected activity in my workplace. So people are allowed to complain about it. That's what it means. So now I've got vaccines as a requirement, and now people are complaining about it as a requirement. Well, they're allowed, and you cannot retaliate against them or terminate them or even discipline them for complaining about that piece of work that's connected to the work. But it doesn't mean they don't have to follow your policy. So if you have a policy in place that where vaccines are a condition of work, they're allowed to complain about it, but it doesn't mean they don't have to follow your policy. And safety and OSHA and compliance with OSHA, you know, like we already talked about there, we're obligated under that general duty clause to provide a safe working environment for our employees. So we want to make sure we do that. We don't want adverse reactions to things, you know, if we mandate a vaccine and then somebody has a negative reaction to it, this could be an issue. So these are things you want to weigh out and clearly state what needs to be done in that, or what the process is, notifying, you know, and whatnot. And you also don't want to create a hostile environment. If you create policies and then you end up in a hostile environment, you've got to address those pieces too. And we'll talk more about that. But bullying and harassment and discrimination, you know, these are all things that are not safe. And if you've got an unsafe environment, you've got to address it as part of providing a safe environment. So think about all of these pieces before you go into the steps of creating a policy. And I know sometimes we get calls from people in the last couple of weeks especially, and they say, well, we want to add a vaccine mandate right away. You know, tell me if I can do it, yes or no. And we say, well, like, please slow down. It's not that easy. It's not a yes or no thing. It's like we need to slow down and put other steps in place first before you can do that.
Rachel, I have a question. If you mandate that I get the vaccine and I have an adverse reaction to the vaccine that you mandated I have, does that fall under workers' comp?
It can fall under workers' comp, yes, because it's a condition of employment. So, Claire, can you jump in and help us with this question?
Tell me the question again. Sorry, multitasking.
No, it's okay. So if the vaccine is a condition of employment and then the employee has an adverse reaction to the vaccine.
Yes, and that's one of the things that was brought up during the healthcare last year and the year before. And one of the things that OSHA had gone back and forth to determine whether it was recordable or not recordable. However, if it is mandated and they do have an adverse reaction, it could be a workers' comp claim. So we have to be really careful about monitoring that and where it's done as well. If it's done on the premises, or are you sending people outside the premises? You have to really look at all those factors. Those are really important.
That's right. And then the other thing is, and again, we're going to talk about some of these things in detail in just a bit, but if somebody actually gets COVID as a result of the work they're doing, so it is directly connected to the work they're doing, then it is recordable. But most of the time, an employee with a positive COVID result is not automatically recordable. I think that's one of our frequently asked questions that we'll cover in just a minute. Okay, so some specific things. Can we make it a condition of employment? Yes, we can. And so now when we move down the line, can we ask for proof? So again, yes, you can ask for proof. And so what does that look like? Like we talked about, once you have documentation, you have to be careful about what you do with that documentation. So you want to be careful what you ask for. Ask for as little as you can. Maybe you ask for a receipt from the pharmacy, or you just ask the question, yes or no, or you ask them to show you their vaccine card, or you ask them to fill out an attestation form. So they fill out a form that says, yes, I have, or no, I haven't, and I'm definitely telling you the truth, and they sign that. So depending on your state laws and what information you want to ask for, be specific and include that, so if you're going to have a policy, list that in your policy and specifically say what you're looking for. Minimize it. Ask for as little as possible.
Keep in mind, in the state of Florida, you cannot ask for proof.
That's right. Know your state laws on that. You want to be very careful in different states. So for example, in Florida, like Cindy said, we can ask, have you been vaccinated or not? But we can't ask for proof. So a conversation you're allowed to do. You can ask for an attestation, ask the employee to fill that out and acknowledge yes or no. But asking for some documentation of proof in Florida, we cannot do. In different states, different laws. Make sure you know. Can we continue to mandate masks or require no masks? Again, different states, different policies, different regulations. But for the most part, yes, you can continue to mandate masks. Requiring no masks is a little bit harder to do because, again, when you're doing anything that is a mandate or requirement, you need to also offer exceptions. So if you've got somebody with underlying health conditions, or if you've got somebody with potential disability components to it, you want to be careful about requiring or not requiring. You always have to offer exceptions for valid reasons. Can we only put vaccinated people in certain roles? Yes, you can. And we're going to talk about specifics in creating a policy for this, but you can create some guidelines about certain roles. So if somebody is exposed to a lot of people, or if you've got people who are going in and out of clients' homes, for example, or if you've got somebody who is in areas that are heavily populated, you can put that vaccine mandate tied to certain roles. There's a way to do that we can help keep you in compliance with. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about vaccine policy next, and we'll go through those details. Can we give incentives for receiving the vaccine? Again, it's a little bit sticky because under OSHA compliance, you really can't incentivize people for things that are connected to issues like this. And so what we're hearing is that small incentives are okay. So if you have small incentives that, if you have a vaccine recommendation and a little incentive that goes with it, you can kind of get away with that. But as soon as the incentive becomes large enough, even they're saying more than $50, as soon as it becomes high enough where somebody would feel like they want the incentive, and then they're going to put themselves, in line for that vaccine just because of the incentive, that's where you start to get in trouble. So you want to be very careful about offering incentives as opposed to just making it a recommendation. Anything to add to that, Cindy or Claire?
I was just going to say
or Janet.
Go ahead, Janet.
No, it's clear. It's clear. No, I had mentioned too to also be careful because I know a lot of the states are pushing that, and you still have to look at some of the situations that a lot of the employees who already have been vaccinated and did not receive an incentive. Think of the morale and the culture that you're creating now. That all of a sudden now you're pushing this incentive for those who have not. But what happened to those who voluntarily did? And that's something you need to also think about from that cultural standpoint.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Great point. Yeah. Cindy, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that you can also add it when you are setting, when you are putting out ads for employment. You can actually put that in the job description as a requirement, just like, you know, requires a high school diploma. You have to be able to type X amount of words a minute. You have to be COVID vaccinated. You can put that in a job description that you post on various job boards as well.
That's right. And another thing, to Claire's point, is perception. So as a business owner, you want to, and again, regardless of personal beliefs, you want to think of the perception that your clients have of your organization. So if you have, if you're establishing guidelines and rules that are protecting employees and protecting clients, and you're thinking about safety, and you're following guidelines that the CDC offers, and you're setting forth a perception of safety and a perception that you care about your employees. So those are things to think of, not only the morale of your team, but the perception of your clients and customers. And that makes a difference. Again, at the end of the day, you want to stay in business, you want to be successful. So creating an avenue for additional business and clients to come in and new customers, I mean, you always want to think about that perception in terms of your business health. Okay, so let's talk about adding the vaccines as a mandate, if you want to do it. And so before we even go there, from an HR standpoint, adding a vaccine mandate is very, very tricky. And most of the time, our recommendation is going to probably be a higher level, recommend these kinds of things as opposed to mandating it. But there are plenty of businesses out there who are mandating it and who are choosing to do that. So if that's the avenue you would like to go, this is some important information. And having a well-crafted written policy that everyone acknowledges will be your safety net. So what you want to do is clearly identify the scope, who it applies to, where they can receive the vaccine, like Claire was talking about, and when. What is the timeline to be fully vaccinated? So clearly define that scope. What does that mean? Well, look at all of the employees and what are you talking about? Do remote employees have to get vaccinated if they never come into the office setting? Do certain positions, you might consider only certain categories of positions need to get the vaccination depending on the level of interaction with others. And do they have close public contact? What does that look like? What does your office look like? Does it make sense? Can you have safe distance in the office, or is everybody too close? Maybe you don't have the infrastructure in place to create a safe environment internally. And so you want to look at those different pieces and carve that into the policy. These positions need to have a vaccination as a condition of employment, and maybe other positions don't. Another thing that's great about doing that is it gives you some movement internally to create an accommodation. So if one position has a vaccine requirement and an individual cannot get the vaccine for one reason or another, then you have some room for accommodations in terms of other positions available. So instead of making it across the board, consider pockets or positions or categories of positions where you have your mandate. And then clearly state the timeline. So maybe you've got employees already and you're going to say all employees need to be fully vaccinated by X date, or your return to office date is September 30th and everyone has to be vaccinated by that date. Something like that, but put that in your policy. And if somebody is a new hire, what is it going to look like? Is it a condition of hire, or do they have a window of time to become fully vaccinated? Are there steps to take in between? So put that in your policy, make sure it's very clear. And then where are you going to provide places on your campus or in your facility where vaccinations can be done in your building? Or are you going to send them to certain places? Provide a list of where to go. Give information that's very clear. Also, who pays? So if it's a mandate, you pay. If you're telling people this is a condition of employment and you have all of these employees already and you're sending them to get a vaccination, you want to pay for their time to do it. And if there's a fee, I mean, most places I don't know of any fees right now, but at some point there may be a cost associated with receiving the vaccine. So that's something you want to cover. And so you want to be mindful of those pieces too. Make exceptions. This is important. You have to have a clear path on what to do if there is an exception. Who do they go to express that information? Preferably not their immediate supervisor. And why is that? It's because of the reason of the exception. So if somebody is asking for an exception, there's a good chance there's a medical reason. So now you don't want the immediate supervisor to be privy to that medical information. So we go back to protecting that information. So you want to have a clear path in your policy that says, if you believe you have an exception or you believe you would be exempt, contact XYZ person or position title. You want to make sure that you handle that information properly. And again, when you have somebody who has an exception, make sure there's no retaliation associated with that in any way. But what you might need to do is create some reasonable accommodations. And so you can see all of the overlap. So now there's potential discrimination issues. You now have ADA to contend with. You have to be careful about all of these agencies that overlap when you're talking about these specific policies and procedures. So when you've got to offer that exception, and you may have people in that position. So now you have reasonable accommodations to think about. Do you provide additional PPE? Can you provide spacing? What are the mask rules that surround vaccinated versus unvaccinated? You have to be very careful about having two separate sets of rules and make sure, again, discrimination is what you're thinking about here and being fair to all of your employees.
And you also have to think about your because all of this is well and good and it's a fantastic policy and you cross every T and dot every I. But in the state of Florida, you can't ask for proof. So you have to come up with some sort of caveat to verify that it's a true and that they're attesting that they've done all these things.
Right. And, we can't say enough. Each state has some big differences right now. So it's just like Cindy said, it's really, really important to understand where your state is on some of these policies and ideas of policies, because you want to be careful. So if you're going to have a statement in your policy about the documentation required, be clear about it. First, check your state guidelines, and maybe you just list something like documentation required will follow state guidelines. You can keep it that simple. And that way, if the state guidelines change, you change with it. And so know what those are. Like I said, maybe you're allowed to ask for that vaccination card in your state. We know that in Florida, you are not. You are allowed to ask if somebody is vaccinated, but you cannot ask for that card. And so you have to be very careful. You can ask them to sign a document that says, yes, I have been vaccinated or, whatever, and attest to that. And so you want to be careful there. Again, seek the minimum. Even if you're in a state where they say do whatever you want, ask whatever you want, ask for proof, this, that, or the other thing, you want to be very careful about vaccinations, because now, layering our agencies on top, we've got the OSHA requirement for file retention on vaccination. So if you ask for a vaccination card, OSHA requires you to keep that documentation on file for 30 years. That's ridiculous. Nobody should keep anything for 30 years. And so don't ask for that if you don't have to. And maybe you don't keep it, but you just have to see it. And then you can verify and check a box. This person, yes. That person, no. And just take a look at it and check the box and then sign your initials that you saw it. Something simple like that. But again, list your documentation requirements in your policy and let that guide you, and be mindful of what you ask for. And now that you have that information, what do you do with it? That's where you have to be careful, and you have to keep that information confidential. So the less you have, the better. Any questions about creating a policy?
Not right now.
Probably in a minute.
Is there a place that you feel the state guidelines would be found easily for where you are?
Yes, so depending on your state, you can go to the state's Department of Labor site and get some links. Cindy had a good link for the health department for Florida. I didn't put it in this policy, but we can do some digging. What state are you in, Esther?
I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay.
Carolina. You can just Google your local health department, and you can either call, well, obviously check out the site first, but they're very receptive to phone calls. I haven't had any health department put me on hold for hours on end, and they will literally tell you just tell them what's going on, and they will literally walk you through the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and for any states out there, you can go to your state's health department and get some links to specific state guidelines. Or even if you just type in, North Carolina state guidelines for vaccine mandate or something, you'll start to get some information, and it'll send you to the official links for your state.
And it'll also behoove you to go to drill down to your county, because there are certain counties. The state might allow you to go mask-free in restaurants. However, Duval County in Georgia might mandate that you have to wear a mask in the restaurant. So just because the state, you have to drill down to the lowest common denominator of your law enforcement. I can't think of what I want to call them.
Location. Yeah. Municipality. But that is such a great point, Cindy. Thank you, because right here in the Tampa area, Hillsborough County has a different mask requirement than Pinellas County. And I know Miami-Dade just did some different requirements. So absolutely, not only state, but also county differences will matter right now. Okay, so going back to some of these issues that we talk about, and we saw a really good webinar the other day with some legal advice, and they said, while we've got these COVID issues and we have masks and vaccines and, what do we do about this and policies and whatnot, but what really happens is we end up with these other problems. So some of our main issues become safety, like we talked about, as a result of harassment and bullying. And so, now we really have these other pieces to think about in terms of workplace culture and workplace violence and other things that are happening. So it's important to, really look at this, at the safety piece. And, if you've got two sets of rules for vaccinated versus unvaccinated individuals, it could be a recipe for some of these issues to come into play, which really could be costly issues for your organization down the road. And, you're actually creating kind of that high risk situation. And we want to help you minimize that exposure. And you could have a bullying situation where there's bullying toward people who are perceived to have not gotten a shot, or bullying from people with strong anti-vax ideologies toward people who did get the shot. You've got a lot of things happening here. So not only do you have to look at the way you set all this up, and you're creating a safe environment, but you also want to take steps for training and information, and have the conversation, and make a workplace, take these extra steps right now that will help you control behavior. And consider adding some harassment training, some discrimination training, some awareness training, and know that the vaccination status can create some division. So you want to be careful to address that and have the conversation and create some training so that people are not afraid to work together and have conversations together and have a safe environment. Does that make sense?
Rachel, what about, water cooler conversations? I mean, it is to some degree, a medical topic, and I realize that I can complain about getting vaccinated or not to my coworkers, but what about the general conversation about, just so I think so-and-so got vaccinated and so-and-so isn't, and they should be, and they're putting me at jeopardy? How do you deal with those water cooler conversations?
So that's a lot of the examples where I hear people saying my HIPAA rights and HIPAA violation, and that is not what HIPAA is, and that is not a HIPAA violation. If people are having conversations about shots and no shots, that's not really anything that you can control. But what you can say is, hey guys, some of this stuff is none of your business. Keep it to yourself. And if an individual doesn't want to tell people, their coworkers, whether they have or have not, they don't have to. So, and that's where we're seeing some bullying. So if somebody doesn't want to disclose that information to their coworkers, they don't have to. It's none of their business. So having some extra training there is important, where you can say, these topics are none of your business. Don't worry about it. What we want to do is provide a comfortable, safe environment for everybody where they feel safe. And so if you've got things set up in your organization where people feel like they're safe, no matter what their situation is, then it's not something that should even come up. It shouldn't be a topic that people need to worry about. We know they do, and we know they're going to, and you can't really stop people from talking to each other. And if somebody talks about their own status, that's okay. But, maybe we do some extra training, and what you want to do is turn your conversations back to work. If you're talking about work topics and work issues and work products and work clients, then those are conversations that help move the ball forward. If you end up talking about personal information and what happened last night when we weren't at work, those kinds of things, you can say, keep the conversations when you're at work about work, then you're going to be in a safe situation. And again, that's going to come with some training. If you have some awareness training, throw that little line in there. The conversation should be about work. It's a good point. I love it. That's where we need to change the focus. And discrimination, same information there. You want to have some training there to make sure people are aware, what is discrimination? Who is a protected class? What does all of this mean? And so if you add that training in, then you're going to protect yourself and minimize that risk. Like I talked about, we want to minimize that risk and exposure any place we can. And when you create policies that are general across the board, that do not discriminate, you do things in a fair way, then you're protecting yourself. So adding some training, adding policies that are fair for everybody, these are the ways to protect yourself. Whistleblowing could become an issue. We probably won't see whistleblowing claims or lawsuits for a little bit, but it could be an issue. So, meaning what? Somebody says, well, they required vaccines, but they were, they only required it of some people and not others, and it wasn't consistent. And then that person lost their job or got discriminated against or had some adverse reaction against them because they complain to one of the agencies about a problem. So again, when you talk about fairness and discrimination, you want to create a path where people can come to you and say, this is a problem I see. So make sure people are aware that they can voice a view to you and not get in trouble or retaliated against.
This would also come into play more often than not when it comes to following the CDC guidelines on how to clean your office.
Absolutely. Again, adding any kind of layer of safety is good for you. If you have certain cleaning protocols, if you have PPE available, if you've created some social distance in your workspace, these are all good things to do. And if, say, maybe some things are not implemented or not in place, and the perception is that people are working too closely to each other, and then somebody voices that or they complain to somebody, that whistleblowing person is protected. You can't retaliate against somebody for saying, I've been placed in danger. So having a policy where people have an avenue to voice that is an important step. And so, thinking about, just like I said, reasonable accommodations, like ADA is another place where we could see issues. If somebody's saying, I'm exempt for this reason or that reason, a medical reason, religious beliefs, whatever it is, or asking for some accommodations during these times, like it makes sense to do that interactive process with people and have the conversation and figure out what can you do to help make it easier for this person and others. And, is it possible to create some reasonable accommodations? And then once you have information about that, what do you do with that documentation? These are the places where you could get in trouble down the road. So think about it and be mindful of it and take steps now to minimize that risk. So we did have some of these frequently asked questions we wanted to share with you, and I'm sure if you've got more, pop them into that chat box. Cindy's on it. But so first, can I ask my employee to stay home or leave if they have symptoms? Absolutely, and you always could. So this isn't new to COVID. If you've got an employee who's coughing all over your office, you can say, hey, I think you should go home for the rest of the day here. Seems like you have symptoms. This was always the deal. Now that it's COVID, not only can you ask them to go home, but you can kind of go to the next step and say, what's going on? Is this COVID? We'll cover that answer in just a second. But yes, if somebody has symptoms, you can ask them to stay home or go home every time that is in play. So what is our responsibility? If an employee tests positive, what do we need to do? Well, like we said earlier, there is no reporting requirement for a positive COVID case unless it was directly connected to the work. So then what? What about, I've got a spouse who is positive, but me, I'm the employee, I do not have COVID, but my spouse does. So what do we do in that case? Well, then we kind of look at some of the CDC guidance here. The CDC says vaccinated people, wear your mask for the next 14 days, get tested in 3 to 5 days. If you're negative, just continue to wear your mask through the 14 days, continue working, you're fine. If you test positive in that window of time, then you would continue to wear the mask, wait and see if you have any symptoms. There's some different things there. Unvaccinated people, 14 days, if you've got that exposure, quarantine for that 14 days, pay attention to symptoms. If there are no symptoms, back to work. If you get tested, you can see if positive, negative. What about asking for a doctor's note? Again, the CDC is saying, please don't ask the doctors to write you a note to go back to work right now. They're very busy and they don't want to spend their time on that. So according to the CDC, please don't ask doctors or don't ask your employees to go bog down doctors with a note, but just follow the other guidelines for quarantine and keeping your employee and your other employees safe. But you can ask for test results. So you can say, especially if somebody is exposed or has a spouse or somebody who they live with who is positive, you can say, please get a negative test result. Again, now another thing you have to think about is the success rate of the test results. Now, we think mostly the test results are pretty good. So having a negative result and somebody being positive can happen and vice versa. But something, you can just wait out the time. And if there are no symptoms, they can return to work. They get that negative test result. But then say they develop symptoms. I mean, you can kind of see my answer is all over the place. So it is kind of all over the place. So pay attention to CDC requirements. And we've got that 14-day window that has been in place since the beginning of COVID. It's kind of still in place now. And so you've got some leeway there depending on vaccinated and not vaccinated. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Are you more confused now than you were?
I'm not, but
I think I better go put my mask on right now.
How do you ask to see the test, or do you just ask to get their verbal that it's a negative? Like, what are the guidelines with that?
Kind of the same thing. You can just ask individuals, go get a negative test result before you come back. Let me know when that is. Or you can say, please send me that email that you get with the negative test result. Or you can say, just send me a screen capture, show it to me on my phone, whatever it is. Again, less is more. And whatever it is that you do it the same way for everyone. So figure out what path you want to take and then make that be your path. Check with your state's guidelines first, and then pick that method and then stick with it. Don't discriminate against anyone for one reason or another. Keep it fair across the board. And then if you do ask for actual physical documentation, be mindful of how you store that and maintain it. Good. So what if my employee refuses to come back to work or back to the office after working remote? So this is the question. I think each of us gets this question multiple times per day. And so a couple things, make sure you understand why that's happening. These kinds of situations are based on fear. So maybe they've got a compromised immune system or a compromised family member, or they're just not sure about COVID and all of the situations. It's based on fear. So take steps and precautions to protect your employees in this space. So create space if you can, create positions that are remote only. We have a lot of clients who have a hybrid where some positions have remote capabilities while others need to be in the office. So there's a hybrid scenario. If you can do that, that might be helpful for some of those individuals. Or figure out how you can create that safe environment with barriers or distance or PPE. What can you do that eliminates all of that, the fear that is associated with that? And have a conversation, talk to the individuals and say, tell me what's going on and, what would it take for you to come back? What does that look like in your world? And have some conversations so that you might be able to then incorporate that and create an environment where people want to come back. Maybe you continue with some remote positions and offer that as part of a particular job description and carve that into the job description where this position has remote capabilities, or whatever that looks like for that particular position. And so when we talk about being fair and not discriminating, it's not all or nothing. You can tie it to positions where this position, these are the guidelines, you know, you might have to have the vaccination, or you might have to wear a mask no matter what, or it has remote capabilities, and carve out all those specific requirements to a particular job and job description. And then that protects you because you have different jobs in your organization and each one has a different job description. Any more questions surrounding that? Now, I will say, you know, there are still going to be people at the end of the day who don't want to come back or refuse to come back, even though, you know, maybe it's a position where a remote option is not available. And so give a timeline. Say this position will no longer be remote effective September 30th, whatever it is. So you give people that window of time to either figure out what the accommodations are going to look like, what is going to be reasonable for that. And then if at the end of it, they cannot meet the requirements for the job description, then they don't work in that job anymore. So if there are other jobs available that they would be interested in applying for within your organization, you know, that's a different conversation. But it's okay to say, you know, all of the employees in this such and such role will need to return to the office by X date.
Hey, Rachel, it's Claire. I was going to mention too that it's sometimes we're finding that if it's an underlying health condition, and if that's the situation, just to follow the ADA due process.
Yeah.
Is treated, you know, fairly, and the information is collected, and then the others do not feel that someone is being, you know, they're being playing favoritism instead.
Absolutely. And, you know, the ADA asks us to engage in what they call the interactive process. And so it's very important if when you have that conversation with your employee and figure out what's going on, why is it that they don't want to come back to the office? They just don't feel like it. You know, that conversation takes you down path A. Well, if they say, I have this other medical situation that could potentially be protected under ADA, then you want to go into that interactive process and see if there's something you can do, if there's a reasonable accommodation where you can help that employee do the essential functions of the job. So it depends on the conversation, and that's where you want to start. Figure out why. What is it based on, and figure out for that particular employee what's going on and what can you do to help. It's very important. Thanks, Claire. So do I have to pay my employees if I send them home? So like we said earlier, the FFCRA is extended, so you have the option to pay employees and get reimbursed on your 941 for tax on the employment taxes, against your employment taxes paid. So a couple of things, you have to pay your employees for any of the time that they've worked. So if you sent them home and they are an hourly employee, then as soon as they're not working anymore, you are not obligated to pay them. But you have the choice under FFCRA to pay them through the end of September, following those guidelines. Now, if it's an exempt employee, it's a little bit different. So if somebody is going home sick in the middle of the week and they have already worked a part of that week as an exempt employee, you're obligated to pay them through the week according to their normal pay. So it gets a little bit gray, and this is why we talk about wage and hour as a situation right now, because some of the pay that is involved, you want to be careful about. And again, make sure you understand what these guidelines are. If you need to call us and get some help walking through that, you know, we're here for you on that. And once somebody is home, if they're not working at all in a particular week, you're not obligated to pay them. But you might have sick time available, you might have PTO available. So people would then have the option to use that time if they wanted to get paid for the time that they're off. When it comes to COVID, you can't require people to use their time off, but it's there. If you offer it, then it would be something they would have that they would have the capability to use. And then with FFCRA, you might consider paying them as an option, and then you get that money reimbursed. Kind of tricky, but not that tricky. And so finally, of our frequently asked questions, what is considered exposure and or close contact? So there's a difference. Cindy and I were talking about this before the webinar today. There's a difference between living with somebody who is positive for COVID and has symptoms and sitting next to somebody in a meeting for 5 minutes who was exposed. So there are some differences there, and you want to think about the way CDC is talking about it is you're within 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes or longer. That's what they're calling exposure.
On a 24-hour basis.
Yes, within the 24-hour window. So if you pass somebody in the hall and that person later has COVID, that's not really exposure. That's not considered close contact. That's not, you're not really at risk. You don't need to send everybody home who walked past that person in the hallway. So pay attention to the CDC guidelines on that, but we're really talking about, when we talk about close contact and exposure, it's within that 6 feet for longer than 15 minutes consecutively. Now you're talking about, okay, do we have a possible situation? So then you go to the next step. Are they vaccinated or unvaccinated? Do people have masks on? You know, what was the room like? Were you outside, inside? Again, the answer is a little bit all over the place, but, you know, think in terms of a closed environment and a long amount of time, 15 minutes or more, with somebody who actually tests positive. And so when we have like that once removed scenario where the employee's spouse works with a team of people and people in that spouse's organization are positive, you're now removed enough that we're not talking about exposure. You know, so that's a case where you pay attention to symptoms. You know, does anybody have symptoms who you're in direct contact with?
We can't say enough how no concrete cookie cutter answer. It is literally situation by situation, which is what we're here for. If you have a situation, call us and we're going to ask you all these questions. We're just going to go down our list. And it's, you know, if your answer is no, we go this way. If your answer is yes, it prompts another question. So there's no cookie cutter answer, folks.
That's right. And, you know, I mean, our answers are a little bit all over the place, and that's because that's where we are right now. And so, you know, kind of follow the CDC guidelines, call us if you're not sure, you know, look at some of these, go back and look at some of the other webinars and, you know, kind of do the best you can. That's what we say right now. When it comes to the vaccine mandate, again, there are so many components to it. So until you actually go through every single step and put a plan in place that's well thought out and crafted, you might stick with encouraging rather than requiring. And if you want to consider making it a mandate, carefully craft a policy first and then go down that path as you have the steps in place. Be careful not to create a situation where there's any kind of unfair treatment, and be mindful of the way people feel, not only your employees, but your clients and customers. So you want to make sure that you keep your risk and exposure minimized and protect your employees, keep a nice, safe environment, and create an atmosphere where your customers and clients feel comfortable as well. And pay close attention to your state laws and also your local laws. It's an important component right now because that piece is all over the place. So I think we've covered a lot of information. I would love to hear some of the questions and anything that you're still wondering about.
Actually, I had a thought though. Also, when it comes to your office environment, you might want to solicit the opinion of some of your employees. I mean, are they okay with going back to everybody wearing a mask and getting their fever taken every day? Are they okay with a questionnaire? It's not that it's a pain for me to have to do it every day, but it's a safety for me to know that you did it every day too. So there might be some discussion amongst the team of, what's good for everyone. So as far as the questions go, this might be a
that is a great piece of advice, because if you, especially right now, I mean, transparency goes a long way. So if you ask for opinions and you ask other people to get involved in the process, it's some real bonus points for you as an organization.
Well, and it makes them feel empowered that you really do care about them. It's not just the physical safety, it's the perception of the situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, the one question I have is, for example, if you are a plumber or an electrician and your employees are going into customers' homes and someone in the home is ill and they end up calling you and saying, hey, your guy was here yesterday, my wife and I are now sick, if that individual becomes ill, does that fall under workers' comp?
Yeah, so here's a great example where I said that there are some reporting requirements. So only if the employee then tests positive and has symptoms. So now, yes, that becomes a recordable scenario under OSHA. And so it's potentially, I'm really not even going to speak to the question of work comp, because there's so many things it depends on. Is the person hospitalized or not hospitalized? Is there lost work? Are there expenses? So yes, that crosses over into a work comp claim because it is directly connected to the work. That individual would not have gotten that if that was not his job. So that becomes OSHA recordable, and yes, that becomes a work comp claim. And how does that look in your work comp claim? It depends on the claim, but that is a great example of when you are crossing over to it is directly connected to the work.
I'm really surprised, but that was the only question I had. That just means you did it
because everybody's totally confused.
Or I'm going with you. You've answered all their questions. So I'm taking the high road.
Well, the point of this one was to gather all of our frequently asked questions and cover them. So I hope we did that. So thank you all for joining us. As always, we appreciate you and value you. I know I can say this for all of our team at CertaPay. We are here for you. And we look forward to seeing you on our next coffee break every other Thursday at 11:30. If you want to see this recording or any other recordings, they are on our website, CertaPay.com. Find the news tab and the coffee break tab, and you can find any of our recorded coffee breaks listed there. Thanks again, everyone. We look forward to working with you as we go down this path. Have a wonderful day.